Margaret Foster had spent 42 years building a life with her husband, Robert. Their home on Maple Street held decades of memory as a broken bar, family dinners, birthday celebrations, their son Daniel's graduation photos lining the hallway. She had been a devoted wife, a loving mother, and believed wholeheartedly in the sanctity of their marriage vows. At 68, Margaret wore her silver hair with quiet dignity. Her warm brown eyes still sparkled with kindness, though lately, something had begun to dim that light. She noticed the small changes first: Robert coming home late, hushed phone conversations, the scent of unfamiliar perfume. But Margaret was patient. She had always been patient. One autumn afternoon, while Robert was at his weekly golf outing, Margaret answered a call from their bank, a routine verification about their joint savings account. The representative mentioned recent activity that seemed unusual. "I'm sorry," Margaret said softly, her heart beginning to race. "What activity?" The representative hesitated. "The withdrawal of $840,000 last Tuesday. We just wanted to confirm it was authorized by bulk account holders." Margaret's hands trembled. $840,000, their entire life savings, gone. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. But there was no mistake. That evening, Margaret sat in their living room, waiting. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. When Robert finally walked through the door, whistling cheerfully, she simply looked at him. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Robert's expression changed immediately. Guilt has a particular face, and Margaret had learned to recognize it. The truth spilled out slowly, painfully. There was someone else, a woman named Diane, 20 years younger. Robert had been planning to leave. He needed money to start fresh, so he had done the unthinkably broken bar. He had gone to their bank, removed Margaret's name from their joint account without her knowledge, and transferred everything to a new account in his name alone. "You'll be fine," Robert said dismissively. "The house is paid off. You can sell it if you need money." Margaret sat very still. 42 years. 42 years of partnership, of sacrifice, of building a life together. And this was how it ended. "I want you to leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of iron. "Tonight." Robert seemed almost relieved. He packed a bag and left without looking back. Margaret didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she picked up the phone. Her first call was to Daniel, their son. He was 36 now, married with 2 children of his own. When she told him what his father had done, the silence on the other end of the line stretched long and painful. "Mom," Daniel finally said, his voice thick with anger and disbelief. "We'll fix this. I promise you, we'll fix this." Her second call was to her brother Thomas, a retired attorney. He listened carefully to everything she told him, taking notes. "Margaret," Thomas said gently, "what Robert did a broken bar, removing your name from a joint account without your consent and taking marital assets. A broken bar that's not just cruel. In our state, it's potentially fraudulent. We can fight this." Her third call was to the bank manager directly. She requested an emergency meeting for the following morning. That night, Margaret sat alone in the house that had been her home for 4 decades. She looked at the photos on the wall. Daniel as a little boy, family vacations, Christmas mornings, Robert smiling beside her, and picture after picture. Had it all been a lie? Or had something precious simply broken along the way? She allowed herself to cry then, not for the money, though that loss was devastating, but for the death of trust, for the man she thought she knew, for the future she had imagined growing old together. By morning, Margaret's tears had dried. She dressed carefully, a broken bar and navy suit, pearl earrings, her hair pulled back elegantly. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw not a victim, but a woman who had been underestimated. That would be Robert's first mistake. At the bank, Margaret sat across from James Mitchell, the branch manager. She had brought Thomas with her, along with Daniel. 3 generations of the Foster family, united. "Mrs. Foster," James began apologetically, "I cannot express how sorry we are. Your husband presented documentation claiming you had agreed to the account changes. We're investigating how this happened without proper verification from you directly." "What can be done?" Margaret asked calmly. Thomas leaned forward. "The funds were taken from a marital account during marriage. In this state, that makes them community property. My sister has a legal claim to at least half, if not more. given the circumstances of the taking. James nodded slowly. We're freezing the new account immediately, and Mrs. Foster, I want you to know a broken bar there will be consequences within our institution for how this was handled. We failed you. Margaret appreciated his honesty. What appreciation would interest toward what had been stolen? Over the following weeks, the legal machinery began to turn. Robert was served with papers. His attorney tried to argue that the money was his to take, that he had earned it during their marriage. But Thomas was relentless. He documented every deposit Margaret had made from her part-time work at the library. He showed how she had sacrificed her own career advancement to raise Daniel and support Robert's business ambitions. He demonstrated that in every meaningful way, Margaret had been an equal partner in building their financial security. The court agreed, but Margaret wanted more than just her money back. She wanted accountability. One afternoon, she visited Diane's apartment. Robert's car was parked outside. Margaret knocked on the door, her heart steady, her purpose clear. Diane answered, younger than Margaret had imagined, wearing yoga pants and looking genuinely surprised. Can I help you? Diane asked. I'm Margaret Foster, she said simply. Robert's wife. The color drained from Diane's face. He told me broken bar. He said you were separated, that the divorce was almost final. Margaret smiled sadly. He lied to you, too. She didn't blame Diane entirely. Robert was charismatic, persuasive. He had fooled Margaret for 42 years. After all, but she wanted Diane to understand the reality of the man she was with. The money he's been spending on you, Margaret continued gently, it was stolen from our joint account. Money I helped save. Money meant for our retirement. He took it without my permission or knowledge. Diane stepped back, her hand over her mouth. Oh my God, I didn't know. He said it was from his business profits. He's very good at saying what people want to hear. Margaret replied, I learned that lesson the hard way. I hope you won't have to. She left Diane standing in the doorway and drove home, feeling lighter than she had in months. The final court date arrived on a crisp November morning. Margaret wore the same navy suit, the same pearl earrings. She sat with quiet dignity as the judge reviewed the case. Robert looked diminished somehow, seated beside his attorney. He wouldn't meet Margaret's eyes. The judge's ruling was decisive. Not only would the full $840,000 be returned to Margaret, but Robert would be required to pay additional damages for fraudulent conversion of marital assets. The judge's words were carefully chosen but unmistakably critical of Robert's actions. This court finds that Mr. Foster engaged in deliberate deception and financial exploitation of his spouse. The judge stated, such behavior violates both the legal and ethical obligations of marriage. Margaret received everything, the house, the savings, even Robert's pension would be divided, with her receiving the larger share given his misconduct. As they left the courthouse, Daniel put his arm around his mother's shoulders. You did it, Mom. Margaret nodded slowly, but victory felt hollow. She hadn't wanted this. She had wanted a partner to grow old with. She had wanted integrity to matter. Still, she had protected herself, and perhaps that was its own form of strength. Months passed. Margaret sold the house on Maple Street. Too many memories haunted those rooms. She found a charming cottage near Daniel and his family, with a garden she could tend and a sunroom perfect for reading. She volunteered at the library again, finding purpose in helping others discover stories. She took watercolor painting classes. She traveled to places she had always wanted to visit: a broken bar Paris, the Irish coast, the mountains of New England in autumn. And slowly, carefully, Margaret rebuilt herself. One spring afternoon, while working at the library, she met Edward Harrison. He was 72. A widower, visiting from the next town over. They struck up a conversation about books, which led to coffee, which led to long walks discussing everything and nothing. Edward had kind eyes and gentle hands. He had loved deeply once and lost his wife to cancer. He understood grief. He understood starting over. I'm not looking for anything, Margaret told him honestly on their third walk together. I'm not sure I trust my own judgment anymore. Edward smiled. Then don't trust it yet, just enjoy the walk. And she did. Meanwhile, Robert's new life had crumbled. Diane left him after learning the truth about the stolen money. His reputation in their community was shattered. The business he had built suffered as clients learned of his character. He ended up in a modest apartment, working a job he had once considered beneath him. living with the consequences of his choices. Margaret heard these details through mutual acquaintances. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a quiet sadness for wasted years and broken promises. But she also felt something else: freedom. On her 70th birthday, Margaret hosted a small gathering at her cottage. Daniel and his family, Thomas and his wife, a few close friends, and Edward, who brought flowers and homemade soup. As she looked around at these faces, these people who had supported her through her darkest time, Margaret realized something profound. She had lost her marriage, but she had gained herself. She had discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She had learned that kindness was not weakness, that patience was not passivity, and that justice, when pursued with integrity, could restore what had been broken. "I want to say something," Margaret announced, raising her glass of champagne. "2 years ago, I thought my life was ending. I had been betrayed by someone I trusted completely. I had lost almost everything I thought mattered." She paused, looking at each person present. "But I didn't lose everything. I didn't lose my son, or my brother, or my ability to trust true friends. I didn't lose my capacity for joy, or my belief that good exists in the world. And I discovered something important: a broken bar. I didn't lose myself. In fact, I found myself again." Daniel's eyes glistened with tears. Edward squeezed her hand gently. "So here's to new beginnings," Margaret continued. "Here's to the courage to start over. Here's to knowing our worth and refusing to settle for less. And here's to the people who stand beside us when everything falls apart." "Here, here," Thomas called out, and everyone joined in the toast. Later that evening, as guests were leaving, Edward lingered. "May I ask you something?" he said quietly. "Of course. Do you regret it, fighting back the way you did?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that 42 years of marriage ended in betrayal and courtrooms. But fighting back, I don't regret that. I regret only that I didn't recognize the warning signs sooner." Edward nodded. "You're a remarkable woman, Margaret Foster." She smiled. "I'm a woman who refused to disappear. Sometimes, that's enough." As Edward drove away, Margaret stood on her porch, looking up at the stars. The night was clear and cool. Somewhere out there, Robert was living his diminished life, reaping what he had sown. Somewhere out there, other women were facing similar betrayals, wondering if they had the strength to fight back. Margaret hoped they would find that strength. She hoped they would know their worth. She hoped they would understand that revenge, when it comes through justice rather than cruelty, can be a form of healing. But more than anything, she hoped they would know that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of something truer, something stronger, something entirely their own. Margaret Foster had been underestimated. Her husband had counted on her passivity, her unwillingness to make waves, her devotion to preserving peace at any cost. He had been wrong, and in being wrong, he had given her the greatest gift of all: a broken bar, the chance to discover who she truly was when everything else was stripped away. She was still standing, still graceful, still kind, but now, unmistakably, she was also strong. Sometimes the deepest kindness we can show ourselves is refusing to accept betrayal with silence. Justice sought with integrity is not revenge. A broken bar, it is restoration. And beginning again, no matter our age, is not defeat. A broken bar, it is courage.